It's worked so far, but we're not out yet.
I wanna know what you're thinking. There are some things you can't hide. I wanna know what you're feeling. Tell me what's on your mind.
Pure energy.
Hailing frequencies open, and welcome to Enterprising Individuals, the Star Trek discussion podcast that boldly goes into excruciating detail about the series, characters, and stories of the Star Trek universe. I'm your host, Aaron Coker, aka Caliban, and frankly, I'm sick and tired of Cal-Rec creep. It starts earlier every year. You've just finished hosing off the grease from Rumari, and bam, it's time for the silent meditation. I'm joined in this episode once again by science fiction writer and editor Scott Pearson. Scott is also the co-host of the Generations Geek podcast, a more or less family-friendly celebration of geekdom on the Chronic Rift Network. Scott, welcome back to the show.
Good afternoon.
Permission to come aboard granted. Today we'll be talking about Meld, the 16th episode of the second season of Star Trek Voyager. The Society of the Federation is a relatively tranquil one. The elimination of scarcity, hunger, and want has brought an end to war and social strife and has resulted in peace and the desire for peaceful, non-violent interaction with the rest of the galaxy. But humans, and indeed all Federation races, have inherited a legacy of violence from their unenlightened pasts, legacies they must continually redeem themselves of, and even in the evolved 24th century, the mysteries of the real undiscovered country, the mind, will sometimes still lead to violent and senseless acts that beggar understanding. But we'll talk about that a little later in the show. First off, Scott, it's good to have you back on the show. It's been a while, and you've been very busy in your absence here, working as a fiction editor, as well as editing for documentaries, editing on the Star Trek Adventures RPG, writing your own fiction, and hosting your own podcast, Generations Geek. Question, would your family recognize you if they saw you walk past?
Oh, I don't know. It's all just a blur, really.
On your most recent episode of Generations Geek, you talked to Zach Stentz, who is a screenwriter and producer, and he recently wrote the Netflix film Rim of the World.
Yes, that was a great get for us. I was so surprised. I was on Twitter in the middle of the night, like you do, and he tweeted out that he had this new movie debuting on Netflix, and that he was available to do interviews with genre, media, podcasts, whatever. I figured he was probably talking about more professional venues than a little father-daughter podcast, but he didn't say that specifically, so I tweeted back at him and said we'd love to have him on. I had already seen the previews for the movie and thought it looked like a likable movie.
Yeah.
And he got back to me right away and said, let's set something up. And so I found myself Twitter direct messaging with him while texting with Ella, who was waiting at the airport in London for a flight to Greece. So it was like 6 a.m. her time, midnight my time, 10 o'clock his time. And we got it all to come together, and he came on the show, and he was a great interview, very personable, relatable guy, and it was great.
That's really cool, and he's had such a varied career, varied in the sense of he's worked on a lot of properties, but most of them seem to have been genre properties. I know he got his start working on Andromeda, on Gene Roddenberry's Andromeda. And then, of course, worked on some of the Marvel films, both in and out of the MCU. And then, of course, this Netflix movie now.
Yeah, he's got a very impressive resume. He's been on contributed to some of the Arrowverse shows. He worked on the Sarah Connor Chronicles, which, underappreciated series, didn't get the time it needed to really
I know.
find
if
itself.
I interviewed him, he'd be like, well, I'm going to talk about Rim of the World. Hold on. We're going to talk about Sarah Connor Chronicles for about 55 minutes and then 5 minutes of Rim of the World. Yeah, that was, I really enjoyed that series. And I think that we've proved with the Terminator property with Dark Fate coming out soon, that we've got a lot of the juice out of this fruit here. And one of the things that I liked about Sarah Connor was taking that idea of alternate timelines and doing something different with it. Doing that specifically because you had this need for an episodic show, but like, how can we find new corners of this, time travel universe to explore, not just, yes, a Terminator has come back in time to kill a defenseless person.
Yeah, I thought it was a great expansion to the franchise, but it just didn't find its audience. Actually, I think I said this to Zach during the interview. It's like, well, if that was on now on Netflix or something, it would just keep going. It'd be fun.
Oh, it would never go off. Yeah.
But on in the old world of the way network TV worked, it didn't have the audience.
Yeah, it's too bad, but that's the one good thing about the explosion of streaming shows now, is that things can generally find an audience if they deserve one. You were talking to him. He was in presumably L.A., I guess, and Ella was, of course, in the UK at that time. So that was a pretty long distance phone call for you guys.
I'd never done anything like that before. I mean, usually I'm just dealing with 2 time zones, not 3.
Yeah.
So we were able to set up. It was 10 in the morning for him, noon for me, and 6 in the evening for Ella when we recorded.
I've talked to a couple different Australian guests on the show this year, and so for me, it's like that's more than the diameter of the Earth away. Of course, it doesn't matter if you're using satellites or if you're on the internet, but the real problem is the time zone thing. Like, I have trouble just coordinating with Ella when she's in England, but now I've got to add a day to it.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems like it's not even real.
Yeah.
At that point.
We need star dates for that reason. Well, we both went to Shore Leave Con this year, Shore Leave 41 in Maryland, and it was particularly exciting for me as I got a chance to meet in the flesh many of the authors who I've developed a digital relationship with thanks to the show. And one of those people was Jim Johnson, who was on the show earlier this year, and he also works for Modifius as a line editor. Now, is he technically your boss? You guys work together?
At this point, he kind of is my boss. I kind of report to him directly. He gets in touch with me when there's things coming up. I'm working on various things for him now that I'm not at liberty to name specifically, but
sure.
I'm going to be doing some writing for some upcoming supplements instead of just the editing that I've been doing. So
that's great.
I'm looking forward to contributing some fun little sidebars to stuff to be named in the future.
Your daughter, Ella, was also at Shore Leave, of course, and good thing, too, because the exuberance of her youth resulted in a few close encounters with some of the con guests.
Yes. Yeah, she just basically, with some encouragement with some of the other people that she was hanging out with, but basically took it upon herself to invite both Anson Mount and Ethan Peck to come over and say hello to us, where all the authors were gathered in a corner drinking, as you do. Right. And it was a big surprise for everyone because and she was giving us grief about, come on, you big author people, don't you ever just go up to the actors and invite them to the table? And but the thing is, it's rare that the actors come and hang out in the bar because, they've just done a day of glad handing with the fans. They're, once they're off the clock, they're kind of tired. They like to go back to their room and have some quiet and not have to face a bunch of fans. But yeah, both of those guys came down to the bar and Ella said hello and why don't you come over? And they did.
Yeah, I just love that. If Nichelle Nichols is not going to come hang out, she's just going to go back to her room. But yeah, I just like the fact that the missing X factor was just, Ella was the matchmaker to get this thing together. The lubricant to make this machine work. So, yeah, that was an amazing experience. And as I've said before on this show, Anson Mount's got a handshake like a Swedish massage.
He's a great guy. I so enjoyed I had a couple of interactions with him at the con. He's just such a nice, personable guy. And I've been listening to his podcast now, The Well, and it's a great podcast. Just this morning, I was listening to his interviews with some of his castmates. So he did 2 episodes interviewing Ethan Peck, and now I'm into the 2 episodes he did interviewing Doug Jones.
Yeah.
And they're great, and you just get a sense of such a great sense of them as people. Doug Jones just seems to be the sweetest human in the universe.
Yeah.
And so I highly recommend any Star Trek fans, you got to listen to The Well, and not just to the Star Trek episodes, but listen to all the episodes. It's a very wide-ranging podcast, so you never know quite what you're going to hear, and it's always interesting.
Yeah. Well, we'll let that little plug go by on this show. That's okay. I enjoy that podcast too. I know you're very busy working on new Trek material. There's of course a lot of new shows in development. Some of our mutual friends are involved with those shows, and it's an exciting time to be a Trek fan. It's also a time, I think, where Trek is looking for an identity, or perhaps trying to expand so it can inhabit more than one space, not just being the Trek show that's on right now, that's vaguely Trek but takes place in specific location or time. And I read an interview the other day with the chief creative officer of CBS, David Nevins, where he was quoted as saying that they are focusing on building the brand of Star Trek. He said that we want to get it younger and more relevant to people, which, looked at from one perspective, is like the worst kind of corporate speak, like a guy in a suit saying, we're going to squeeze this thing until it becomes a black hole. But on the other side, we're gearing up for a show starring a 79-year-old and all his old friends. So I'm not exactly sure what making it younger means in this context.
Well, there is the Nickelodeon show.
Yeah.
So they are doing one that is specifically geared toward a younger audience. And I would say that the pacing and the storytelling that's done on Discovery is geared toward a newer crowd of fans. And then now you've got Picard, which is going to definitely appeal to the older crowd of fans. And then you've got the Lower Decks coming up. So I do think that they are trying to cover more bases.
I don't know anything about the TV business, but I know that the kind of fractioning that you're getting with different streaming networks and different offerings I think could benefit the burgeoning franchise of Star Trek on TV. Because normally, you want your show to hit all those quadrants. That's how you're going to get everybody. You're going to lose them to Big Bang or somebody else if you're not young enough or whatever. But now you just keep them in the playground. You've got the show for the older people, the nostalgic show. You've got the cartoon show, the new show. So it seems really smart. But to say something like making Trek relevant, buddy, Trek's always been relevant. That's the point of Trek. It is at its worst when it is up its own butt, exploring something that's not relevant. But that hasn't been a problem, I don't think, for a while.
Well, and they're really working toward, and I hope this continues to come together. But as far as, there's going to be the shows now on other networks. But as far as CBS All Access goes, they're working toward that we should reach a point where there's basically always a new show on. That the shows have 10 or 13 episode runs, and then when one is over, then the next season of the next one comes up, and then when that's done, another season comes up. Because now we have Discovery, Picard, the Section 31 show, and so those can all kind of be running in series. It is an exciting time to be a Star Trek fan.
Why did you choose this specific episode, Meld, to discuss on the show today?
2 words: Brad Dourif.
Okay.
His performance and this character arc has just stuck with me for all these, 25 years now?
Yeah.
Typecasting, I suppose, but he is so good at having this sort of creepy aura about him. Yeah. And that's certainly part of the reason why it stuck in my mind, but also just how it starts and then where it goes when he turns up again. Just it's disturbing and sad and depressing and interesting. And I guess we can get into the details of that as we work through the episode, but it is something that stuck in my mind. And so when I was trying to think of something to do and trying to come up well, I was kind of leaning toward Voyager or one of the other series that you haven't done as many episodes on. Mm-hmm. And so when I tried to think of standout episodes in Voyager, this one popped in. And it's a little bit less obvious maybe than some of the other episodes that you think of when you think of Voyager.
It really is amazing, his performance. And I don't know if it's like the difference between big screen and small screen acting. There's no shade to the Voyager cast, but he really is on this other level. You know, it's different than when you bring, I don't know, just, you know, a famous TV guy of the week in to do like a admiral part. Like the camera loves him and he's just fascinating. You know, it's like a cat, you know, when he's on screen. And I think it's perfect for this role because of course the character himself is supposed to be this enigma, that not even Tuvok can figure out.
Yeah.
And I've always been fascinated by crime and punishment, really, in the Star Trek universe. Like, presumably crime is extremely rare, but it has to happen still. You know, we see like bad admirals or anybody who's ever had a grudge against Kirk, you know, this week, they get let off screen. But where do they go? You know, they're usually violent or semi-violent criminals, but what about like Bashir's dad? Like, does he get some Felicity Huffman jail time after the truth gets out? Does he go to a club-fed prison like Tom Paris?
I would assume so. And
yeah, he must.
And obviously what made the idea, the question even more interesting is the context of Voyager, that they're alone, what do they do?
A lot of problems on Voyager are that way. I mean, there is no, you know, a Starfleet to call on subspace. There's no solution incoming. You know, there's no help. I think it's funny that Paris's penal colony is in New Zealand. It's like, come on. Come on, Federation. You can do better than that. Why not reopen Alcatraz? Mental illness is also something that is addressed in this episode and in Trek, but I feel like it's rarely fully explored. And of course, like a lot of fields, like the Trek's writers aren't psychologists, but quote unquote crazy people, you know, get cast as villains, you know, or whatever they're suffering from is like a sort of one-note justification for the plot. And a notable early exception in TOS is, I think, the episode The Doomsday Machine, which we talked about the last time you were on the show. Decker's like the human antagonist, ostensibly, in that episode, but his psychosis, I think, is fairly well drawn, especially as an effect of the PTSD that he's experienced. But then again, many of the people who created and wrote the original series were in World War II, were in Korea, and themselves would probably understand and be very familiar with shell shock and have experienced things like that themselves. Yeah,
when Decker really breaks down in that episode, you feel for him. You know, you know that he's, even though earlier on you obviously you're siding with Spock against him, but for the time period, surprisingly layered portrayal of what the guy had gone through.
Yeah, I think it was a sensitive portrayal for the most part. A little bit of a Kane mutiny in there, and you know, I think it was a big leap forward for Roddenberry and company to add a counselor to the cast for TNG and to try to explore the emotions of the crew more. But you know, I think the franchise as a whole, you know, I think if they have a particular lane that they want to tell stories in, and as long as someone's emotions or fear or psychosis serve that space military fiction story that they want to tell, it usually works out. But they don't usually go outside of that too much with these psychological stories.
Yeah, well, it's kind of awkward, and it kind of ties into some of the problems that TNG had, in that Roddenberry wants the Federation and the future to be perfect.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of, you know, it's been reported many times over the years that the writers had a lot of problems in the early seasons because he wouldn't allow them to have conflict among the crew, because in the future, everyone's so well adjusted that just wouldn't happen. But then it really ties your hands behind your back trying to tell dramatic stories. Right. And the further that you take this concept of, you know, there's no material wants because we have replicators, it's like everything is there. It's like a lot of the root causes of crime and that sort of stuff have been eliminated theoretically. So, then what about mental health? You would assume that mental health issues have been taken care of in much the same way as they can just, wave a wand over you and fix a broken bone, that they can probably help people with their phobias and neuroses, And, so then it's like, if you just have a bunch of happy, smiley people walking around, where's the story? So it is kind of awkward. I think that every once in a while they dip into it, and with varying success over how they portray it.
I think it shows, I'm hoping restraint on their part, in that they stop short of having that wavy wand thing to fix things. And if you did have a planet of smiling, happy people, they all served Landrew or something like that. It was generally depicted as a bad thing. Yeah. Well, we'll definitely explore this more as we get going, talking about the episode Meld, the 16th episode of the second season of Voyager. It first aired on February 5th of 1996. The teleplay for the episode is by Michael Piller, who we've, of course, discussed many times on this show. Just to remind you, he was an executive producer and writer on TNG, DS9, and Voyager, and the co-creator of DS9 and Voyager. He also wrote and co-produced Star Trek Insurrection. The story for the episode is by Michael Sussman. Sussman got his start on Voyager as a writing intern, and this is his first Voyager credit, and he would go on to be a writer-producer on Voyager and Enterprise, and write or co-write 33 episodes total of both series. The episode was directed by Cliff Bole. He's another name that we've talked about on the show before. He directed 42 episodes total of the 3 24th Century Trek series. The Bolian race was named in his honor. The stardate for this episode is unknown. It presumably takes place in 2372. And your assignment, Scott, and you know how this works, if you can, is to give us a 25-word synopsis of Meld.
After a murder is discovered on Voyager, Tuvok takes it upon himself to try to help the violent offender with horrible repercussions for himself.
And he throttles a holodeck on Neelix, like we've all wanted to once or twice. A very therapeutic program. Great job. This episode was commissioned in a way by Michael Piller. He had a story idea that centered around Tuvok being confronted with senseless violence and being affected by it psychologically as a Vulcan. And Piller had explained this idea to some of the freelancers that were pitching for the show, but nothing came from that. Meanwhile, Michael Sussman, who's working as an intern on Voyager at the time, had the responsibility of being a reader, reading submitted scripts from freelancers and summarizing them for Piller for possible purchase. And Sussman himself had an idea for a story in which Tuvok mind-melded with an alien serial killer, and the aliens' hate and racism would sort of infect Tuvok and stoke his own repressed feelings about humans. And as the story goes, on the last day of Sussman's internship, he pitched this idea to Piller after Piller had passed on all the other submitted pitches, and Piller bought it in the room, which for an intern and for a guy who's trying to make it is like, that's a good story.
Yeah.
You've pitched for Star Trek, haven't you?
No. I did submit on spec a couple of scripts when the series were taking those, but sure. I didn't get a nibble, so I never got to pitch to the show.
What is a nibble like? What do they do? They say like, tell us more, or do you get on the phone with somebody, or
they have you come out there,
or they fly you out there?
Yeah, I don't know if they necessarily pick up the ticket. I'm not quite sure what happened. You'll have to ask Bill Leisner about this, because he actually did get to go in and pitch after they were liked one of the scripts that he sent in on spec.
Which has got to be that's got to be nerve-wracking.
I can't. Well, of course, I've heard the story from Bill, and I just can't imagine. I try to imagine myself at that age, because this was decades ago. Yeah, so you're in your 20s or whatever. I couldn't imagine myself having the guts to do it. Like, you'd have to try. You wouldn't turn it down if you had the opportunity. But when he tells me about the whole thing, I just think, I think I would just, be in behind the studio building, throwing up with nervousness or something, know.
Yeah.
But he was in the room pitching to one of the guys. I can't remember who it was.
Doing it. Well, this isn't a prescription, but I mean, this is what like cocaine is for, right? It's for producing the scripts, and then it helps you pitch them as well in a very sweaty manner. Well, despite this idea being Sussman's, Piller himself took up the writing duties on the story, as Sussman, as an inexperienced writer, was deemed to be too green at the time to bring the script to the screen in time for production. And Piller made changes to the original pitch. Sussman had originally conceived of the Suitor character as a reptilian alien. He was changed to a human character. Piller pursued this original idea of Tuvok struggling to understand a killer's actions. And he actually hired a psychiatrist from the California Institute for the Mentally Insane as a consultant on the script. And they discussed the psychology of violence and also the language of the science of psychology that was used in the episode. Tim Russ, the actor behind Tuvok, was also instrumental in the development of the script. It was his suggestion that the race of the killer be changed from human to betazoid, and he reasoned that we'd seen Tuvok mind meld with humans on the show, and everything went okay, but perhaps the act of melding with a passionate and telepathic species like the betazoids would be a riskier proposition for a Vulcan. While writing the episode, Piller confessed that he had lost the plot while getting wrapped up in depicting Tuvok's dark emotional outbursts, and he wasn't sure how to end the episode. And according to him, Rick Berman and Jerry Taylor suggested that the episode should loop back around to the issue of capital punishment that was discussed earlier in the episode, specifically Tuvok questioning his motivations in wanting to kill Suitor, and whether it was justice for the crime, or if it was just rage that was motivating him. This also marks the first appearance of Voyager's Brig on the series. Let's talk about some of the guest stars in the episode, and really, there's only one person to talk about. Sorry, Ensign Hogan. Maybe you'll be on a future show. We can talk about you then. Or the hand, Ensign Darwin's hand. Brad Dourif, of course, appears as Lon Suitor on the episode, and the character would reappear in the second season finale, Basics Part 1, and the third series premiere, Basics Part 2. Dourif is an astonishingly accomplished actor. We'd be here all day listing his most recognizable credits. He has over 170 credits on IMDb, and he got his start. He got his start as Billy in Milos Forman's One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. There's a lot of actors who are like in the right place, right time, are the right person for a role. And you go, what happened to that guy? But this guy started with a bang and has been going ever since.
He's the only thing I remember about Exorcist 3.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, George C. Scott.
But the Gemini Killer.
Yeah, I mean, he's incredible. And I remember watching the Lord of the Rings DVD commentaries and him talking about how when he had to play Grima Wormtongue, they're like, hey, shave your eyebrows, will you? That'll make you look really weird. And apparently this is something he gets asked to do a lot. Like he had just gotten off another role where he had no eyebrows. And so his girlfriend, his partner was like, oh, God, again? Gonna look at you with no eyebrows for another 2 years.
The great thing about making him Betazoid was then he was wearing the dark contact lenses. So he just has these black eyes. And that really, did well for the character as well.
Yeah, it really is a versatile effect. And of course, I mean, there are many real life humans who have very dark irises, and have like dark eyes, but it looks sort of warm on Deanna Troi. But yeah, here it's just like two black holes. It's like nothing.
Yeah,
it's really great. Dourif is friends with Ethan Phillips, the man behind Neelix, and apparently they were having dinner. And the idea of him doing a Voyager episode came up, and he was game. He was actually doing a lot of TV guest spots at this time, and he's no stranger, of course, to weirdo and psycho roles. He played a convicted serial killer who is talked to in a cell by a main character 2 years before in the X-Files first season episode Beyond the Sea. And, of course, year after that, he played a serial killer in the Babylon 5 episode, Passing Through Gethsemane, which was directed by Adam Nimoy.
Oh.
The director, Cliff Bole, and I think I agree with him, he thought that Dourif was a little underused in the episode. He said, quote, I don't think we showed enough duality in Suitor as the maniac taking on the Vulcan's calm control. We should have played off of him a little more, but there are only 44 minutes. And I think that is really the problem with this. Tuvok is the main character here. But of course, Suitor does get a chance to come back for 2 more episodes and develop his arc and his character more.
Yeah, I could have done without the subplot that they were setting up with Tom Paris so that we so that we could have more Suitor.
Yeah, well, speaking of criminality and people acting, against society or what's right. Tom does get a little arc in this season where he's insubordinate, and he's just being a snot, really.
Yeah, and it turns out to all be a setup to, make him appear to be on the outs or in trouble or something. And then I can't remember the details, but, and so I get that it was this arc that they were doing and building up to, but then when you have a story, such a compelling story as this, and you have to lose screen time from Brad Dourif and Tim Russ, who are
right.
really knock it out of the park in their portrayals, and then you have to cut to the goofy scenes in the
back to
French bar, whatever it's called. Yeah.
Yeah, I have to wonder, though, is a society without any money, are they good with it? Do you know what I mean? Like, if you gave a Federation citizen like a $5,000 loan and just told them to go crazy, would they come back with anything? When Tom sets up this whole, hey, everybody, let's gamble on this sort of random Keno game, basically, and I'm going to skim off the top, I wonder if people really get that they're being got. Because it just seems so... He's just so, just a little fee for the house. Fee for what? All you're doing is just asking the computer, like, what the number was. So, yeah, I wonder if they really get it. They're easy marks. There's a sucker trapped in the Delta Quadrant every minute. Tuvok actor Tim Russ said that his favorite guest star to work with was Brad Dourif, sorry Michael McKean and Jason Alexander, and others. This episode is very highly rated by fans. Screen Rant voted Meld one of the top 5 Voyager episodes in July of 2019, and all the cast and crew generally regard it as one of the best hours of early Voyager and have effusive praise for Russ and for Dourif. And, of course, the real seal of quality, after the show completed, Tim Russ included the sickbay scene in his acting reel. Which he's very good in that scene. And I like the fact that he I always love it when you see that a Vulcan actor is actually a really good actor and wasn't just like cast to be emotionless because that's all they could do. You see this with like Brent Spiner. And of course they always gave Brent Spiner chances to act out and to do like crazy Data things. But Tim Russ is like really, really good. But also he's just really good at being this guy who does eyebrow acting and kind of frowns a lot. Yeah.
I love if I can call attention to one bit, when there's a scene where Tuvok, well, I'm kind of jumping ahead a little bit because it's after the first mind meld. And when he goes to Janeway to report it, he's wringing his hands basically.
Yeah.
And it's not overstated. It's just at the bottom of the screen. They don't make a big deal about it. They don't do like a heavy-handed cut, like close up on his hands or anything.
Right.
Janeway doesn't seem to notice it, so it doesn't get called attention to in a big way. But it's great because while he's saying that everything's fine with him, he is fidgeting with his hands in a very un-Vulcan way. You can tell that he was much more disturbed by it than he wants to admit. Such a great little scene.
That's a great thing. I also love in that scene in sickbay, he doesn't go like full Joker, right away. At first, he's just sort of, he's, you can feel Tuvok there still. It's just a little turned up. And then, of course, when he's presented his arguments and they're not giving it to him, instead of having Vulcan reserve, then he gets mad and he starts throwing things around. And it's like, we've all seen a bro, at closing time at the bar. He just wants one more beer. And yeah, it just had that feel to it. That was really great.
It's very disturbing.
Crime and punishment, and particularly mental illness, is something that is, I think, underexplored, at least how it fits into Federation society. We get stories about weird punishments in other societies. You get 20 years of hard time put in your head, or you have to relive the victim of a murder's experiences. But as far as the Federation goes, if the neuralizer from Dagger of the Mind is the best that we can look forward to as far as psychiatric treatment goes, we're in a lot of trouble. That or the facility in Whom Gods Destroy. If that's what, I know that those are like the ultimate, that's the Arkham Asylum of the Federation, but not a lot of treatment going on.
Let's see. Well, I mean, they do bring up that the doctor is trained in various things as they're trying to decide what to do.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think that you can tell already that Tuvok is compromised when he brings up to Janeway that Suter, when he brings up the idea of execution, that Suter is open to execution, and he phrases it carefully so that he's not saying we should execute him. He's just mentioning this.
Right.
But then when Janeway is so shocked that he's mentioned this, and she's, dismisses it outright, he says, well, maybe the victim's surviving family would think otherwise. Well,
Yeah.
that's such an emotional appeal. I mean, he states it very dryly. He's still speaking in very Vulcan tones, but
Yeah.
I mean, that's completely an appeal to emotion. And so it just, it's this slow burn as you realize that he's been much more messed up by the mind meld than he's letting on. And of course, eventually it explodes outward.
It's so interesting too, because we never get like a real brochure about getting into the Federation, but I think it's like generally accepted that as a race, if you want to get in, there are things that you have to meet. And one of them is like to have, a centralized government. You can't have like sectarian strife, having warp drive, of course. And I think one of those things might also be like, have you realized that the death penalty is a bad idea? Like, do you put people to death for crimes? Because I can't imagine the Vulcans. I don't know. They tend to have cold logic, and I don't think that we see them using any capital punishment on screen. But I would think that the Federation is generally like, we don't do that. We send them to New Zealand or wherever. We don't, or to give them the neuralizer.
Yes.
But we don't. But we're not putting people to death here. And I think the fact that Tuvok even floats that. Casually, as you mentioned, but the fact that that's absolutely an emotional appeal.
That one thing that confuses me about Tuvok's descent is the trick holodeck scene. So Neelix, it kind of starts out, he's doing his usual thing where he's trying to get some sort of reaction out of Mr. Vulcan. And it starts getting a little over the top. I mean, when he actually puts his hands on Tuvok's face,
Yeah.
and you're kind of wondering, like, whoa, this is a whole other level. But you're still kind of believing it, and then Tuvok grabs him, and you're like, wow, yeah, he's losing it. And then you finally get the reveal that it's a holodeck program, and Tuvok leaves. But then you're left wondering, well, how much of that did Tuvok program? It's like, did he say to the computer, I want you to take Neelix and turn him up to 11?
Right. Yeah.
So that I can, throttle the little creep?
Yeah.
Or, it's a little awkward, but it plays off, then it does play off well when he's discussing what to do with Suter himself and suggests to him using the holodeck. And Suter says that he's already tried that and it doesn't work.
Yeah, I know.
It's like, well,
I played a ton of Grand Theft Auto and I'm still the same.
Yeah. And of course, it's interesting, Tuvok doesn't admit to Suter that he also has used the holodeck to let some steam off.
Yeah, and Tuvok's not talking to anybody here. There's no counselor, but he doesn't even go to anybody who could provide that role. So we don't really know how much of this is his idea and how much of it is, Suter sort of infecting him, having that impulse to use the holodeck in that way, feeling even remotely the guilt that Suter might deep down feel about the loss that Darwin's family would experience, and therefore perhaps suggesting execution for that reason. Instead, we just get Tuvok going to computer run program. Mr. Vulcan says die.
that first scene after the holodeck between Tuvok and Suter, they're both so good in it, and you see Tuvok is on edge, but then Suter is the opposite. They've kind of switched roles.
Yeah.
And Dorff was so good, and Russ was so good, and it's really compelling to see the guy that we already know is a complete sociopath just saying, wow, that kind of worked. Let's keep doing this.
Yeah.
And Tuvok is just, that would not be advisable.
Yeah. It's possibly a radical treatment that somebody, I know they're out in the middle of nowhere, and apparently they do have cloud computing because they can't access Suter's criminal record in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
And I guess they can't access the DSM-27 or whatever they've got now as far as telepathic treatments for psychological problems. The 60s writers, like early Trek writers, love their mind beams. They've got the dagger of the mind thing. They've got the thing that they stick people in Whom Gods Destroy, the pacifier or whatever. I remember Melinda Snodgrass saying that she was talking with Gene about the legal system in the future. And Gene was like, well, we won't need courts. Criminals will just be fixed, which is chilling. But I don't think Gene meant it in a Big Brother kind of way. I just think that as a writer, he was more focused on the problems of his time, civil rights, atomic escalation, and war. And he knew criminality was a problem, but, the fix-it ray was a sci-fi solution, a kind of yada-yadaing of the problem.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think also I think I mentioned this earlier, that he's thinking that a lot of the core reasons for crime have been eliminated, because if you eliminate need, if no one's really poor, that would eliminate a lot of crime right there. It's just like you don't have desperate people that are hungry or and are stealing for that reason. But then I also think that he meant that we'd be able to really help people, treat people that have some sort of physiological problem, some sort of mental problem that is causing them to act out. People like Suter. You'd like to think that, okay, now we've reached a point where we've figured out what causes a person to be a sociopath. We can help them.
Except we haven't.
But
because all the scans of Suter are, essentially normal.
Yeah. But he clearly is the textbook sociopath. Well, and that was another great thing about making him Betazoid, where he's got the line saying that Betazoids can sense the emotions of other people, and that he doesn't get that, and he can't even sense his own emotions. And that worked, so that was a nice extra twist, that if he had just been human, it wouldn't have had that extra little layer of science fiction interesting stuff there. That
Plus, it's a great Smiths lyric, I think.
And he's even more broken than a human sociopath. For a Betazoid to be that bereft of any sort of empathic, emotional ability.
It's really weird. I guess not weird, because I think science fiction writers are prognosticators, and they are, whether or not they're trained specifically in the sciences, they are looking at things. And this idea of these violent impulses was something that Michael Piller, wanted to explore, of course. Both he and Brandon Braga also was, in talking about the episode, talked about the senseless random violence that shocks you and has no explanation. And Braga specifically labeled it as a, quote, 90s issue, unquote, which, again, it's a myopia of contemporaneity, because he couldn't conceive of something like 9/11.
That is, I was just chuckling at that great turn of phrase, a myopia of, what was that exactly?
Contemporaneity.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's my manuscript title for my Trek novel. It just seems so naive now. I mean, in the world that we live in, which this is all pre-Columbine, as well. So the fact that they were trying to confront, I don't know, I think if this was done now, we'd have to have another act or a different act where we get some kind of solution. I don't think that we would have been comfortable leaving, because it's not resolved, Tuvok. because there is no answer, and Tuvok can't find an answer. But I think if this was done on Discovery, it would have to conclude in some way. We'd have to have something that reassures us or some kind of solution in story, because it's left very open-ended.
Yes, but I do love the shot, one of the final shots when, or one of the final shots with Suter in this episode when he calls for help for Tuvok.
Yeah.
And kind of cradles him, waiting for help to arrive. It's a touching scene. But then in the long run, after you see what happens to Suter, then it's like, oh man, it's pretty bleak. And this is kind of name dropping. I hope she doesn't mind, but I got to tell you, I happened to be talking to Kirsten Beyer last night and told her I was going to be doing the show and that we were going to be doing Meld. And she said, "Did you pick that? It's so disturbing." I was kind of like, well, yeah, that's why it sticks in my mind. It is disturbing. That sometimes those are the things that really stick with you, that when you see something intrude on the happy Federation Starfleet lookout, and you get something that is, like you said, there's not really a resolution here. There's not, it's definitely not a happy ending.
Yeah.
Because even if you were able to treat Suter successfully, he still killed a guy. Yeah.
Yeah. And what does the Federation do about that? Is there a way back? I'd have to imagine that something like restorative justice, which people won't even try to talk about in our time, has been fully explored and hopefully implemented in the future, where we just give, I don't know, what do you do? Do you give him does a robot follow him around for the rest of his life? That's actually something I stole that from the Culture novels by Ian M. Banks, which has a very open society called the Culture, like the Federation. Mm-hmm. And the thing about murder is it's very hard to kill somebody in the Culture because there's cloning and people's minds are backed up. And so I guess the impact is less. But if you do kill somebody, it's not just okay. There is a punishment thing, but eventually you're let out again. And you're followed around by a drone basically for the rest of your life. Mm-hmm. And it isn't so much that you have to be punished by a penal system. It's that the biggest punishment in the Culture is social excisement or just being ostracized from society. Because the whole thing about the Culture is this is a great society. We all enjoy playing and spending time with each other and stuff. And if you're the guy that nobody invites to a party, that is your punishment. Yeah.
But you need some sort of science fictional way to enact that, because I have an acquaintance who's a very hardcore libertarian free market kind of person.
Great. Let's get him on the show.
And at one point he was saying something about how, in his worldview and the worldview a lot of the people that go down that same path, everything can be solved by the free market. And so he was saying that if, for people who've behaved poorly, well then, businesses wouldn't serve the person or whatever. And that would be, justice, and that would be punishment. But then it's like, well, but how am I as a business owner to know who I'm supposed to be punishing? He's kind of trying to eliminate big government. He's kind of borderline anarchist kind of thing. And it's like, well, but then where's the structure that is sending the notices every morning to businesses to say, here's a person that's on the list, the bad list,
right?
The Santa bad list. Don't give them their, burgers and fries when they come in because they've been bad. So it doesn't really make sense, it seems, in the real world, unless you can add a science fictional layer that, but there's the drone. That guy's one of those guys. He's got the drone hovering over him. But that also seems rather unwieldy. But
I think we've kind of got it now. It's social media and social capital. You know what I mean? They're already implementing this in China and other countries. If that's the guy who will steal some roles and not pay for them.
Yeah.
When you live in the Star Trek universe, though, the roles are free. So is it the guy who butts in front of the line or something like that, or is really rude about it, gives you a bad review on social media? I don't know how it works. I don't have a true crime podcast, believe it or not, so I don't know a lot about serial killers, but the language that Suter uses in a lot of his scenes remind me of something that like a Ted Bundy has been quoted as saying, feeling a detachment from his actions, not knowing why he did it. Specifically that line about like, I didn't like the way that he looked at me is something that I think that you could imagine somebody on Mindhunter saying. Yeah. There's no screening process for hiring McKee, I think. You can, you can tell. And I like the fact that it's just another like great lost opportunity of Voyager is exploring more the sort of dark side of Federation society and the McKee. But I like the mention that the McKee take anybody. They're just looking to fight this war. And it reminds me of war movies like where you've got like the crazy guy who is only at home in war. Yeah. Animal Mother, from Full Metal Jacket or something like that. Yeah. The speech about how like, as long as somebody's shooting bullets at him, he's a perfect human being. But it's just like when he goes back to society, that's the problem. Having somebody like Suter who knew that he had a problem and specifically joined the McKee. So he's like, I got to get these impulses out. At least I can kill I can Dexter this. I can kill the bad people. Yeah. For an enlightened society, that is a horrifying thing for a member of that society to be thinking and to have to seek an avenue or a release like that.
Yeah. So, and the idea that, Tuvok brings up the idea of trying to work these things out on the holodeck. Yeah. But then, just kind of imagine that. I mean, how much more awful would those programs be than the most embarrassing thing that Barclay came up with, Right. Accidentally wander into Suter's program when he's in there filleting people or something.
Yeah, give me 1 second. I've got it till the end of the hour. So hold on. Yeah. Well, I mean, it must exist though. I think there's an argument to be made, and maybe not on this show, but that would be a way to go. That sure, Roddenberry believes that we eliminate all the problems, you eliminate all the bad impulses, but I think we can agree that can't be true, at least not fully. And so maybe, you've already got like Vulcan Love Slave, all these programs that Quark has. I don't think that, and they don't get into this too much in Trek either, but I think that we accept that their love lives are different, but yet most of the ones in relationships we see are monogamous. But then if you go, hang out in Love Slave 5, do you come home and your wife is like, okay, where you've been? I think it'd be too much for a primetime TV show in the 90s to try to explore characters, blowing off steam. Yeah, Worf is fighting Skeletor all the time on the holodeck, and that's fine. Yeah. But of course, he's a Klingon. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. Sometime in the future, the psychology of the social acceptance of the holodeck, we got to get into that. There's a kind of Trek episode that we get starting, I think, in earnest with a character like Odo, who's supposed to evoke kind of a detective gumshoe-like character, where we're solving a mystery. And that gets translated to Tuvok on Voyager as the logical chief of security. He's trying to solve these mysteries often. And this episode starts out looking like it's going to be a whodunit, and it becomes a whodunit that the bottom falls out of as our investigator early on learns the truth and just can't get past the reality of the answer. It's like if Poirot, had figured it out by the, middle of the second act. And then the rest of the time, he's just like, I just don't understand why this person did it. Yeah. On the one hand, it's obviously it's interesting to watch Tuvok wrestle with this. But on the other hand, you just want to say, you've been around humans a long time. You know that, that there are people that are just, broken like this. It's like, why is it so, he keeps wanting there to be a logical answer to something that's a completely illogical set of circumstances beyond Suter's control. Yeah. Yeah, it does make it that much more interesting that, like you say, once the bottom drops out of it, it goes from a whodunit to a why done it, and he just can't let it go. Yeah, and Russ himself, he had two friends who were doctors, and he consulted them about trying to get insight into the workings of the criminal mind and where like hostility and violence comes from in violent criminals. And of course, I mean, we don't have an answer in the 20th century, 21st century. So I think that all contributes to his mystery. Tuvok might be the worst person to try to understand a psychopath because already he's a Vulcan. He's a Vulcan of advanced age, but all that means is that he's spent even more time with suppressed emotions. So now he's taking on these emotions. And the one thing that I really love, I like this episode a lot, but the one idea that I really like is the idea of this guy with supreme emotional control taking on these wild emotions and not being able to handle them, which makes sense. But then this other guy who is supposed to be this unhinged killer, getting this control from the Vulcan, but also maybe showing more discipline mentally than even the Vulcan does, in that he is fighting these impulses every day. And sure, he killed a guy, but I mean, he's in his 40s or whatever. And like, almost like, the Vulcan is supposed to be the guy who can control this stuff, but it's like, here you go, buddy, try this. And 5 minutes later, he's turned his quarters over, and he's hiding in the dark. Yeah.
It's, I was about to say it's a fascinating episode. Then I was trying to stop myself from saying it's a fascinating episode because
fascinating,
but it really is. It does so much work with the whole Vulcan thing. And one thing that I really liked was when Suter started talking about mind melds, there's a scene where he says, well, I guess mind melds are violent, that they're sort of inherently violent. And to me, it brings to mind the mind meld that Spock forced on Valeris in Star Trek VI. And it's like, there was the perfect example. That's just, these mind melds can be violent. They can be, in that case, out of desperation, basically, to stave off potential war with the Klingons. Spock forces a mind meld on someone, and that is horrible. And it's horrible to watch Spock do it, even though you understand why. And so, that was, 3 or 4 years before this episode. So I'm hoping that they knew that would pop into people's minds, that as soon as Suter started describing mind melds as a violent, penetrative act, that you just like get this image of Valeris, under Spock's hands. And it's because even though she's the bad guy in there, you can't help but, I mean, that's an uncomfortable scene.
This is a good episode. I think it could have been a truly great episode if they had really kept it to the two of them. Maybe, because I'm thinking about an episode like Duet, and maybe they thought, well, we don't want to do Duet again. Mm-hmm. But that interplay of one guy wanting something, the other guy wanting something else, presumably, then them switching jerseys and then having to deal with both what they want and what the other person wants. I think all those subtextual things are there, but I almost feel like the show runs past them or misses them sometimes in order to give us Tuvok killing Neelix. I
definitely could have watched 42 minutes of Suter and Tuvok just dancing around each other. And I kind of understand, in the pre-credit scene, you get the Tom Paris thing, and that's like this bit of housekeeping that they're setting up for this multiple episode arc. Right. And then you get the Neelix scene before you get to the meat of the episode. But of course, the Neelix scene was just a setup for the later Neelix scene. But the later Neelix scene, the only point of that was to show Tuvok losing it.
Yeah.
And you could have done that in some other way that didn't require the Neelix setup, so that you could have given all the screen time to just the two of them.
And there's no completion to that as well, because in that initial thing you see when Neelix comes over to Tuvok, I'm like, oh, here's our C-plot. Okay. And then you get kind of a twist on that when, he gets fake murdered in the middle, but then there's no I guess it wouldn't fit. I love the ending of this episode where Tuvok is talking to Janeway and he's like, as much as he can as a Vulcan, he's like, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry this happened. But of course, I mean, nothing's going to break these two up. I mean, just having Tuvok call Janeway pathetic or whatever it is, disgusting, that's not going to, these two are together forever.
Yeah. Well, the thing that's, I think, a little muddled about that scene is, on the one hand, you're saying, well, you know, he's out of control. The violent tendencies of Suitor have thrown him off balance and that sort of thing. But then, on the other hand, you're kind of wondering, well, are we just supposed to think that he's just lost his emotional control and that deep down he has some of these feelings, that he's suppressed them, but now they've come out? And that doesn't seem to quite work. You don't want to think that he has these hidden dark thoughts. And so I could have used a little bit more clarity there. It's like, well, has he just, because I think you have to think of it more than just he's lost his control.
Right.
He's both lost his control and he's essentially been infected by Suitor's problems.
Yeah.
So that he's not speaking like his true dark thoughts that you don't admit to. You want to think that these are thoughts that are coming from outside, because you don't want to think that has these things.
But it might even be, you know, as somebody who is the constable of sorts, he's the security chief. He may even be 1% of him entertaining the idea that, I don't know, it might be the right idea to kill this guy. And to me, it feels like addiction, like in the way that an addict decides to give something up, but then that addiction makes them justify and think of reasons to why it would be okay to do this or that. If he's got part of Suitor in his mind, who does maybe in his own 1% way want to die, then now you've got Tuvok, who that 1% is now 99% because it combines with the self-pity and loathing of Suitor, for Tuvok being like, well, this is the right option. It's such the right option that I'm going to sabotage this force field with these high energy, high voltage wire that's on this hospital bed. I don't know how that works, but we got to get him out of there somehow.
Yeah, one of the things that makes the episode so compelling is that it is hard to tell where cold logic and sociopathy,
right.
You know, how are they interacting?
Which is the name of your next book.
Yeah. That's my autobiography.
Right.
And because you're wondering, how are they interacting? Where does one leave off and the other one? Because from a very cold standpoint, you could say, okay, so we have the dwindling resources on this ship, and we're going to continue giving that to this guy that's just locked in his room for the next potentially 70 years. Right. Or do we just kind of, say goodbye, and so you can make it sound like it's a cold equation, just debit and credit. But But then in the end, it's like, well, are we really going to decide who lives or dies on the basis of wealth, basically? Because then you're looking at the sort of horrible justice system we have right now, where rich people walk free and poor people who've done very little wrong get sentenced to life for, minor crimes. So, and then Javert. Have we mentioned Javert yet? Do we want to? Do we want to break into song?
What? Are we doing Eddington and Cisco here?
That.
Yeah, I have Vulcans and Betazoids, have they never mind melded before? You'd think that we would anticipate this. I think in an earlier episode, I think it's the one where Tom Paris is been convicted of murder and Tuvok wants to mind meld with him, and the doctor's like, hold up a minute. I know more about mind melds than you do because I've got all the medical literature that anybody's ever done. And apparently Vulcans have never hooked up with a Betazoid in a mind meld capacity. Apparently,
yeah. I didn't do my deep dive research on the question.
It just seems like it's fire and ice. It's a super telepath or something like that. But anyway, of course, it doesn't go great here. As we get to the end of the episode, is there anything that you've left unsaid? Anything you wanted to cover for the episode Meld?
Well, there's one parenthetical that always interested me, that and it's really got nothing to do with the episode, but it was mentioned by Tuvok in there. When Tuvok is saying, you just have to lock me up. I'm too dangerous to be allowed on the ship now. And he says, I've been trained in multiple martial arts.
Right.
And the one thing that I think we have never really gotten to see that I want to see in Star Trek is a Vulcan martial artist just going, put in a position where it's like, now it is time to take care of some business.
Sure.
Some sort of, Vulcan Krav Maga kind of thing, and just, taking out lots of people in a cold and ruthless manner. Maybe that's if Quentin Tarantino does make a Star Trek movie, maybe that's what we'll get. We'll get a kick-ass Vulcan martial arts scene.
And with like weaponized telepathic touches and things like that.
But on a much more serious note, the only remaining comment that I would like to make is to spoil the next two episodes in this little arc, that we see that the mind meld with Tuvok has helped Suter.
Yeah.
And so he gets confined to quarters ostensibly for up to 70 years. But instead, in the follow-up episodes, in the season finale and season debut of the next season, the ship gets taken over, stolen, the crew put off, and in desperation, the Doctor just kind of lets Suter out of lets the dogs out. You got to let it out. You got to do it. You got to take one for the team and just go back to your ways, and go full on Dexter. And it's very disturbing because on the one hand, he saves the entire crew essentially. If not for him, would they have ever gotten the ship back? But then he's killed in the process. If he hadn't been killed, he would have just been back to being this totally, raving sociopath that had gone on this horrible killing spree. It really is a very disturbing and depressing story.
Yeah, and it's the kind of thing that I think you see in other shows, other tales like this. Him hulking out, or we don't need Jekyll, we need Hyde right now.
Yeah.
But to put it in this, and I mean this in the best way possible, but this namby-pamby world of touchy-feely Star Trek 24th century, there has to be an answer there. And whenever something like DS9, okay, so the Dominion has already taken over a quarter of the galaxy. Now they want half. We got to fight them back.
Yeah.
But I always kind of feel the same way about these moments in Trek where it's like, we're not going to take it anymore. Full torpedoes, fire the phasers, and we're going to get them and kill them. Maybe, a ship would be willing to sacrifice themselves rather than, take life in a first contact or a war situation. But that's not what we want from our action storytelling. So you get something like Discovery, which I think Discovery is well positioned because it takes place earlier. It is a darker toned show, and I could see something like, we might have had something like that already on the show, especially with Georgiou, where it's like, Georgiou keeps killing people. Hey, stop that. But it's all in the service of whatever our heroes want to accomplish.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's a dilemma, but it's a fun one though. I believe that you said that your favorite captain was Captain Kirk. I'm just going to guess there. I think this episode has a real TOS-y kind of feel to it. I believe that Spock has been in a situation like this before, and it just had a real original series feel. How do you think Kirk would have weighed in this situation?
Boy, it kind of feels like it probably would have played out very similarly, because you picture Kirk standing over Spock in the sick bay, recovering.
Right.
And
Spock trying to apologize.
Yeah, and Kirk understanding, because I don't think Kirk wouldn't have executed him either. I mean, of course, the difference is that unless you really change the setting, if you're picturing Kirk on the Enterprise as it was, he would have been able to just drop off Suter at a Starfleet facility,
right?
And he wouldn't have had to. He wouldn't be facing the same problems. But yeah, I that hadn't occurred to me the TOS-ness of it, but it does. You could almost see this just taking this script and crossing out the names, and writing in the other crew members, and it's like, wow, that would have made a great Kirk Spock episode.
Goofing around with mind melds and Spock losing control. Yeah. Also, Russ talked about enjoying episodes like this in the same way that Nimoy did, in that it gave them a chance to do something different and kind of run with it a little bit. And of course, there's plenty of original series episodes where Spock's acting goofy, everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree, which just supports my theory that Janeway is the female Kirk.
In many ways, some of the arcs they gave her, the stories, she was willing to mix it up, get in there, much like Kirk, yeah.
Well, for reporting for duty a third time, your rank will be advanced to that of Lieutenant Commander, with all the rights and privileges owed thereto. And, of course, you work in the Department of Action Figures, Collectibles, Not Toys Division, Open Box Bureau. How are things down there? I mean, you are basically in charge of this department at this point. You answer to no one.
Yes, and I really need more shelf space for the action figures down here.
Sure.
I need, because these aren't holodeck action figures. These are the real things. They take up physical space. And so I need to knock down a couple of walls, some bulkheads somewhere.
I was watching an Enterprise. I was watching a YouTube video the other day about the size of the Enterprise D, a Galaxy class vessel, and about how they say that there's, about 1,000 people, I guess, on board. Mm-hmm. And it has, X amount of square footage, and they worked it out, and it's like every person of that 1,000 people has like 8,000 square feet to themselves. Like, it's just like, I know they do things where they go to a planet star's going to go nova, and they've got to like get a lot of people off a colony or something, and so it can go to a capacity of like 10,000, but it's just echoey halls, and probably like tons of empty space like in the hull. It explains why you only see like occasionally like a person walking through the corridors or something like that.
Yeah.
So, I think we could definitely requisition some more space, knock out a couple walls, and set up some shelves for you there, for sure.
Rank has its privileges.
It certainly does. Well, Lieutenant Commander Pearson, thanks for joining me to talk about Star Trek and the Star Trek universe. If people want to continue the conversation, and they can at EISTpod on Twitter and the Enterprising Individuals Facebook page, where can people find you online?
I am on the Twitter, like the kids do, and I'm on Facebook like the old people do, but I don't look at it that much anymore. And I'm on Instagram. You can find my personal website at scott-pearson.com. You can look us up on generationsgeek.com and find handy links to all our episodes. I'm all over that interwebs.
Anything coming up that you want to share with the listeners?
The upcoming episode of Generations Geek is Ella regaling me with stories of Harry Potter related things that she was able to do while she was in England. She saw, places where the film was shot. She went to the Warner Brothers Harry Potter studio tour. She was able to see the I've just blanked out on the name of the stage play. The something of the cursed child.
Yeah. So the Cursed Child. Yes.
She saw that live on stage in London.
Wow.
And so, really a play-by-play of all sorts of Harry Potter stuff. I'm not sure when the episode is going to be going live, but
Well, between that and Tolkien and all those studios, films that shoot there, Destination Star Trek. I mean, there are a lot of cities in the world, but she really couldn't have picked, it seems, a better place to enjoy yourself and also to get material for the show.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. Look out for that, listeners. And Scott, thanks again for joining me.
Oh, thanks for having me.
We're signing off until the next mission. Hailing frequencies closed.